Hi, I'm Avi Freedman, and welcome to Network AF. On this week's episode, I'm talking with Grant Kirkwood, CEO of Unitas Global. We're talking about cloud, how it's built, what's behind it, peering and how the cloud gets to end users, edge connectivity, and the state of the art and even more the state of the business about how people are getting connected, and then community and the community side of networking and how to get in, you can get into a career path in networking companies. Hi, and welcome to Network AF. This week, I'm talking to my friend Grant Kirkwood, who's built a number of successful businesses and run them from into the 90s and the dawn of the internet to leading edge cloud and connectivity technology. We're going to be talking about cloud, about peering, about the edge, about how people get connected, and also about community and how we get people into networking and how we grow our diversity into the next generation. Grant, if you could give us a quick intro on yourself.
Sure. Great to be with you, Avi. And so I've been kind of in and around internet infrastructure for basically my whole career. Started my first company in 1996 when I had a lot less gray hair than I do today. But I kind of grew up in the early bulletin board systems and very slow modems and just kind of fell in love with it. And so, Unitas is my third company, but have started a couple others before. Really just like the plumbing and the kind of infrastructure that most people don't really see as part of the internet and cloud and the kind of physical manifestation. So it's always been kind of my passion. So anyway, glad to be here.
Thank you, and thank you for helping the world stay connected. I love that I get to work with folks that make the infrastructure and then the applications that sit on top that people use. It's pretty cool. So at Unitas, as you mentioned, not your first company. What got you to want to start Unitas, and sort of how do you think about where your focus is?
Well, it's funny because Unitas, being my third company, I kind of wanted to do something a little different. Mm-hmm. I'd been in the internet infrastructure space for my whole career, and so I thought, well, let's combine all the IT resources that enterprises consume and kind of provide that as a fully baked managed service that includes everything, and that's literally what Unitas means in Latin. At least we say it does. But the whole idea is that we could kind of do that on a global basis. And what's happened in the time since we started providing those services to today, the need for very custom, bespoke kind of IT solutions has decreased with the prevalence of AWS, GCP, Azure, etc. But the need for more sophisticated networking solutions has increased. So kind of come full circle, back to doing what I've spent the early days of my career doing, which is fun and exciting. Although it's the world's changed a lot in those years, at least in some ways, not in other ways. Mm-hmm. Still fiber, still data centers, still conduit in the ground that makes it all work.
It's pretty amazing, really, that now actually the world has simplified in that, there's optical underneath, but from a IP basis, it's not like we're hooking up Sonnet and understanding all that stuff. Although there are good things about that from a telemetry perspective and debugging versus Ethernet, but it is pretty amazing that that Ethernet is effectively the same thing as when we were doing vampire taps, or maybe you escaped vampire taps, but just moving from hubs to switches and all that, and it sort of still works. And when you think of the whole internet as actually running as a serial protocol, one bit at a time underneath, you just sort of awed at how fast computers are versus, as you mentioned, the era when people got into it. So it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that really, but I learned more when we started Kentic about in the US, people think about internet connectivity as something I go get to the internet provider. And then, as you said, IT stack, I go get from others. I know that in Asia Pac and Europe, we have customers where they are much deeper into the IT stack, for their companies. Now, some of them are thinking about, well, we don't want it all to be AWS. So we need to do, as you said, bespoke networking and also, other solutions. Is that I want to say a business cultural problem, for you when you took this approach in the US that people weren't expecting, to have a service provider and a solution provider, or MSP all in one, or has that been an advantage?
I think it was initially because, in the early days, people kind of focused on, what type of storage array or server or, what kind of software is running on it. And they're very opinionated about those things. And that was fairly globally, I would say. And people have become much less opinionated, right? So it used to be, I need to have a rack that has this type of thing in it, right? And I think the rise of kind of on-demand consumable cloud services has negated the need for that level of kind of specificity. On the other hand, in the early days, the how you connect to that thing was almost an afterthought, right? Because it was driven, the consumption was driven by the IT buyer in the organization, as opposed to someone with kind of a broader remit. And then the kind of connectivity or telco buyer bought their pieces, and they were almost quite distinct. And so it was an afterthought. And what's happened is that's kind of shifted too. Now you find that the consumers of those same IT services in cloud form are now also consuming network services, and they kind of have the expectation that they can consume those services the same way that they're used to, spinning up virtual machines, right? And the business hasn't quite caught up to that industry-wide, which I think is a great opportunity for our business and others that have kind of taken a more modern, network as a service type approach to consuming that capacity.
So really, if I think back to a dinner that I had when I was at Server Central, and we had a vendor in, and we had, I think, 10 people from the vendor, because we had the account rep, the account sales engineer, the storage sales engineer, and then one rep and sales engineer from each of the 5 things that they had, 2 SANs and an object store thing that didn't work, and an object store thing that was going to work at some point, and a filer, and trying to talk about all this. And for all of them, the network was like, not 10 megabits, but gigabit or something. And I was like, you do understand that, like, this is at the dawn of big data. You do understand that would be like sucking the ocean through a straw to put, half a petabyte on the other side of it. Even a 10 gig connection, how long would it take, to do something? And there was, even though cloud is all these things, it was a very different focus, I would say at the dawn of it. But it almost sounds like the APIification, right? Network as a service, the enterprises want to consume that way. And to talk about cloud, so I've always thought of cloud as other people's network storage and compute. Now we are in everything is infrastructure as code. And so cloud is effectively, in some sense, it's just all these technologies we know with weird names consumed via API. But the enterprise, sometimes use it at a higher level. And so how do you see your customers, thinking about cloud? Do they understand that network? Are they getting bit by the fact that they don't take network into account, or do they understand the networking, is a critical part of that? How do they view that strategically? And then, as they bring it into their operations?
Yeah, I mean, so there are some enterprises that we see. Well, let me give a little context first. So our customers tend to be either large regional or multinational enterprise. So they're typically locations in different continents and hundreds or thousands of employees. And so what I would say is there is a subset that is very focused on network and connectivity as kind of an underlay to their broader IT strategy, but they're in the minority. And that's usually because they've had a connectivity focused practice as part of their business. So as an example, we have a customer that's a healthcare provider. They provide software for hospitals and healthcare facilities. And as part of that, in their traditional model, they actually procured last mile circuits into those healthcare facilities to provide the delivery of their software. And so they had what looked and felt very much like a telco within their business. But as I said, that's very much in the minority. For the most part, we more commonly see enterprises being bit by the fact that they didn't consider the needs of the network as they as they looked at what their IT strategy is. And especially like in the last 2 years, in particular, we've seen this in a big way where all of a sudden, we had this massive workforce that shifted to work from home, all of a sudden jumped on Zoom and Teams and WebEx and all these other things and turned on video for the first time, and got very used to that mode of working. And then, fast forward to, the last, 6-9 months, all of a sudden you got a bunch of people back at the office, still some people at home, let's say it's hybrid, half, whatever, and finding out that all of a sudden, that office doesn't have enough internet bandwidth in the office to support the number of remote video users that are now collaborating, from home, and very, very quickly scrambling to get more internet capacity. And like that kind of scenario is very commonly playing out. I think also, the shift away from traditional MPLS to SD-WAN as a quasi replacement alternative. Same thing there. We've seen a lot of enterprises that just kind of go and buy whatever local connectivity they have from whatever local provider in that particular market exists. And assuming that it's all just going to magically work and there's going to be this good, consistent experience that looks and feels like their traditional MPLS, and then quickly find out that the regional provider in South Africa that they bought from doesn't peer with the tier 1 ISP that they have in North America, and so therefore that underlay is a bad experience. And that impacts, what they have over the top. So yeah, I think probably 70-80% of the time, more commonly, we find the enterprises are saying, oops, as it relates to the network.
So I just want to poke at that. When COVID started, we had a lot of customers that were saying, hey, how can we look at what will happen if we unleash the Kraken and do split tunnel instead of bringing everything back through our corporate network. But that was as things were starting to go video, as you point out. So you're seeing sort of the reverse effect of people being trained on new patterns and then coming back, even if it's less frequently, but to offices which wind up just having wound up under provision just because the usage patterns had changed. That's interesting. We probably could scry in our data and see that, but that wasn't something that I was, aware of, was going on. So,
very much so. And then you've got the enterprises that did the, traditional centralized internet, decryption and inspection stack.
But that broke 2 years ago. That broke 2 years ago when everyone, was trying to come in. Yeah.
Broke in a day. Exactly. Literally overnight, they had just enough internet for the office when everybody was meeting in the same room, went home, all of that internet for, I think in that case, 40,000 employees all of a sudden was going over VPNs back to their stack. I mean, it broke in a day. I mean, they had to break out that local internet by policy, literally overnight, or that business couldn't have continued to operate.
Interesting. So It's been interesting as we work with service providers. They certainly understand peering and interconnection. Um, Digital enterprise that really started before or after SneakerNet was ever a thing, where the business is the applications that run on the network. They sort of understand the value of that, even just from a performance optimization. Like in the 90s, peering was like, oh, I'll save a lot of money. I don't have to pay, X as much. But right now we see it more from the software companies think about it as control and control over performance and the destiny of my packets. At least I have the food when there's a problem to go do something rather than calling someone up or emailing them and hoping they'll do something. We've definitely seen a lot of enterprise that are more traditional that come at it from the perspective, oh, I have a CDN. As long as the CDN will get to me, and it'll be fine. Do you think that the average, I'll say, mainline enterprise that's becoming a software company but did not start that way, are they becoming more interested in peering, or are they more looking for someone to help them solve the problems that might happen when, as you said, I go back to the office and there's congestion, or I shifted from on-prem to a bunch of SaaS services which take a lot of bandwidth. How do you see that going in the non-software company enterprise?
So I would say they don't know to be interested in how that interconnection happens. So they're very interested in making it work well, and very interested in getting content or applications to users as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I think there's probably a de facto assumption that, well, put it on CDN and that's going to happen. What they don't understand is why the very aggressively peer with any eyeball kind of network approach that the CDNs have contributes to that. They don't understand that piece typically. And in the enterprise space, we do a lot of education about what is a tier 1 ISP and what is a tier 2 ISP, and does tier 1 mean better or not? And the typical enterprise, their basis of knowledge is the marketing slicks that are put out by the large global carriers, that basically tell the story of bigger is better. And then when you explain that, well, actually, the reason that CDNs are so efficient at what they do is because they take the exact opposite approach to interconnection with other networks. And so there's this education process. And when we literally draw the picture of the donut and the tier 1s and the tier 2s, and by the way, all this stuff out here is what you actually are connecting to, that light bulb kind of goes off. But it takes education. When we have that conversation with the enterprise, they get it, and it becomes important. But to your point, they don't know to be interested or pay attention to that without that kind of level of education in terms of how the internet actually works.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see. One of our customers, Netscope, does a lot of aggressive explanation really about not only why it's good to be using someone that's broadly connected and can be better than, again, the CDN argument, better than just throwing up a couple of connections and doing it themselves. But it does seem like in the world of APIification, the default is, well, the packets will do whatever. Packets, what? Or they'll just magically happen. When I was at NetAccess, we took this approach because I wanted to. The reality was, little dirty secrets actually did peering because it was $800 a megabit or $50 a megabit. I'd rather have $50 a megabit. So the actuals, it started with cost in the 90s for sure, and probably a fair bit of ego. Like, I am doing what the people that build the internet do, and just the engineering. I want to understand the internet, which is this cool thing. But it was true. We noticed when we started doing performance tests that, as you say, there's this bifurcation, and we tried to make it about an and, like, yeah, buy from, someone who's in the club, but the people in the club don't directly connect to this whole host of other people. So you talked about donut. I know what that means, but maybe for people listening that don't, would you like to explain, or, what is the donut peering, what is this bifurcation that we're talking about here?
Well, besides chocolate and sprinkles.
Yes, exactly. Besides that.
I mean, so the whole concept of donut pairing is that you really, if you look at the internet as a whole, there's, I think, 74,000 ASNs on it today, somewhere in that neighborhood, although it keeps growing.
Yeah.
There's a very small number, double digits of those, which are effectively tier one ISPs that have settlement free pairing with 100% of the routing table. And I like to use the analogy of Fight Club. You don't talk about it, and once you're in it, you don't let anybody else in it. Mm-hmm. And then you've got somewhere on the order of 5,000 to 6,000 ASNs that are the classic tier two networks. Half of those being content, half of those being eyeballs. And if you look at the traffic on the internet as a whole, something like 75% of traffic transits, originates, or terminates between those tier two networks. So that a classic analogy I always like to use is somebody at home on their cable modem watching something on Netflix. Some of the very largest cable providers are very large, but still tier two networks that buy transit from tier ones, as is Netflix. And that represents a huge chunk of traffic. And Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, go down the list, and then line up all the eyeball networks. They very, very much fall into that same category. And so if you think about the donut with the 5,000 or so ASNs that sit out there in that kind of tier two ring, and the small number in the middle, the whole idea is that if you're a tier two eyeball network and you go around the donut and peer directly with a tier two content network, you're effectively creating a bypass ring around the tier ones in the middle. So that's why we call it donut pairing. But it does demonstrably improve performance. Fewer hops, lower latency, better throughput on a whole.
Less chance for congestion. Yeah. And now we have the torus, which is really, if you had the plane, which is the overlay networks, we have customers that feed us their DNS and we can see what sites they're going to, and 90 to 95% of their traffic is these meta networks, like, as you said, Netflix or CDN like Akamai, or whatever. So it is pretty fun. And at Kentic, we have BGP analytics, so we can see this and we classify edges and who's getting transit and all that. But my favorite, speaking of Fight Club, my favorite informal algorithm for looking at tier one versus tier two is the best way to find out who's a tier one is to ask every network who are the tier ones. They will all name the actual tier ones and themselves, and then you remove the identity mapping, and then you're left with the people that are probably really are. But yeah, from a strategy perspective, I really believe, I'm not just trying to be fair to our tier one and tier two customers, that having some connectivity from the donut hole and some from the donut is what you want to do. And I'm hopeful that as people think about taking their packet destiny into their hands and connecting to cloud, starting with cloud, whether you do it yourself or whether you use a network as a service or your service provider to do it, I'm hopeful that can get people into it because, we're seeing a little bit right now of at least hot topic around splinter netting and what's going on with Russia and Ukraine from an infrastructure perspective and Russia from a censure perspective. If you don't have enough connectivity, and so far I've just been thankful the connectivity is rich enough that when the physical infrastructure is working, it's mostly working.
On the previous note for a second, totally agree with you. We talk to our customers all the time about the best way to get the most diverse routing table is with a tier one and a tier two. Right.
Interesting. Even though you're a service provider, you'll recommend. That's what we did at NetAccess because it was a battle we weren't going to win, saying we were better than level 3 of Verizon or whatever, and it was based in technical fact. Right. This is the best way to control your destiny.
Yeah, if you multi-home between two tier ones, you're not creating a lot of diversity in your routing table.
Mhm.
If you connect to a traditional tier one and a very aggressively peered tier two, you're creating a lot of diversity in your routing table, and that gives you optionality.
Mhm.
And to your point about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, I think the same thing applies a lot there too, right? You look at some of the some of the Russian ISPs that sit on the peering exchanges, throughout Europe, the links, DKIX, AMSIX, etc. They get a lot of their connectivity through there. I know that some have been disconnected as a result of the sanctions. But it is something I've been talking with people about recently is the unintended effects of sanctions, of that it effectively completes the call it the Great Wall or Iron Curtain or whatever we want to call it of internet censorship. Whereas everything that's been done within Russia to this point has really been layer 4 and above. And we've seen that VPN usage in Russia grew like something like 8,000%, just in the first week of the invasion. And so there is a sizable, percentage of the population that's using VPN technology to get to, Western news sources and whatnot. But I worry that, if you cut off access to the rest of the routing table completely by turning down transit and peering with Russian ISPs, then that no longer becomes an option, right? Then you
Right.
literally do have a splintered internet. Right now, from a layer 3 perspective, it's still, there's still
Yeah,
routability.
there's been discussion about it, but definitely some connectivity has changed, but it hasn't been a bifurcation. It hasn't been cut off. I mean, the only side that's been cut off is just when physical infrastructure is destroyed by the tragedy. So,
Right.
when the last cell tower goes down, there's no connectivity. So, yes, hopefully, putting the infrastructure back together will work, and be pretty quick. And the good news is the technologies that we've had since the 90s work pretty well for this, and are working to keep things going, even as we can definitely see impact, as infrastructure is being attacked physically. It's sad. We think about infrastructure being attacked for decades as a logical attack, and now we actually have it being physically attacked, but it is mostly staying up, and fingers crossed on that. So peering, the point is to get between networks, which can be sort of eyeball or content or both. Maybe that's a naive view. That was the 90s model. I think of edge. There's been a lot of, we'll put trailers in parking lots, the servers can talk to each other. And before COVID, at the end of 2019, I had just been to a number of customers where they actually had like a little data center in a closet. And I had this realization, it's like, wait, this is the actual edge. The actual edge is not, applications looking to run today, is not this, or driving your flying cars or whatever. But the other side of the edge, which became critical with COVID, is sort of the home. You said to me something, which is that you had a conversation where people were talking about the fact that the business model that hasn't changed. I guess I'll ask you, for what was that insight? What was that conversation? That you were in. That was about access. For home and business.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would agree. I think the concept of edge computing is still the on-prem, server in a closet model, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's still in place in a lot of businesses, although I think decreasing, generally speaking, at least certainly as a percentage of overall workload. But it's still there. And that you mentioned flying cars. So as an example, the GPU that's in the Tesla that's doing the real time driving, you couldn't send that up to a cloud, no matter how close to the edge it was.
Yeah.
So I would not want my self-driving car to be reliant on a good LTE connection to.
If the telemetry is delayed by 2 seconds, it could be okay. when we get to real metaverse Ready Player One, then
Right.
we have to solve some application architecture issues, but then you might need, sub-millisecond locality. But
That's right. Yeah. So that kind of has to be in the car at that point, right?
Mhm.
But yeah. So if you think about the overall, getting back to what we were talking about before, where there's kind of, there was the universe of, IT, which are servers and storage and stuff like this, and then kind of telecommunications to connect it all together. The compute side of it, the consumption model has transformed to this very, sign up online, credit card, launch a virtual machine, and go do something with it. And then when I'm done with it, I turn it down and I stop paying for it. Even though that's all underneath all that are very physical assets. So it's buildings and generators and servers, right? Hard, heavy metal stuff, right? Even though it's very much a capital investment to do all that stuff, the industry has shown us very clearly that you can say, I just want to consume a little bit of that just for a little bit of time, turn it up, turn it down, and build a very successful business doing that. Mm-hmm. The last mile access business, the traditional telco fiber into tall, shiny building, has not evolved in the same way. And so I think there's a real opportunity for last mile access providers to shift the way they think about providing access into buildings and into something similar, where you're consuming the network services and capacity that you need kind of on demand for the period of time that you need it, and not do the traditional sign the piece of paper for the 3-year contract at the fixed price for the fixed product that you have, for that whole term, whether you need it or not. I think there's a real opportunity for that part of the business to catch up to the way that we've started, become used to consuming IT, compute and storage capacity.
They still have all the capex costs though, so they still have a nut to keep that building connected, unless they have a more flexible backhaul. And I remember all the people in the 90s that were talking about doing, wireless and all that actually just bought T1 tails and lost a lot of money pretending they were doing wireless, but weren't actually. And, it's interesting. I talked with Elliot Noss about smaller ISPs and why he's trying to be one, but we have a lot of both direct and we have some WISP aggregators that, larger WISP that does what we used to do in networking co-opetition. They sort of sell to people that, flexibly provide to their neighbors. There are people doing and playing with this, but usually it's sort of more the people that were, if they're not old enough to be hams, they sort of have that mentality, which is like communication is good and we need to keep this going. And sort of like what you would imagine could happen in clandestine if the barrier came down, to communications for a country. What would people do? They'd probably try to, CB ham what the digital version of that is, connect things. Is that what you mean? Is it wireless or is it just a business model? I mean, and are you talking about mostly multi-tenant buildings, residence and office?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, mostly multi-tenant. And yeah, it's not a technology problem. It's a business model problem. And yes, there's still that capital investment that you make to, core into a building and put fiber into it, right? But it's the same. You could argue that it's the same as Amazon making a capital investment to put servers in a data center and make them consumable in that model, right? I think it's harder for a telco to do it because it is so locationally defined. Who is in this building,
right?
And are those customers sufficient for me to recoup the capital investment? But I think the thing that cloud in general has shown us is that if you make needed resources easy to consume,
drives consumption. Convenience drives consumption. Right?
You make it easy to consume, it gets consumed. And telco capacity into tall, shady buildings is still very hard to consume. It's still calling salespeople and negotiating and signing contracts and the rest of it. It's still not a.
So it's network as a service for the eyeball edge, whereas network as a service has been, because I'm very familiar with all the network with the virtual interconnect companies. I did Packet Fabric version 1 when it was just metro area, where we're just like, damn, why is it so hard to get between buildings in New York and San Francisco? All these big peering buildings are all over the place, and you have to dial through the phone if you're in Singapore and order a cross connect and do all this stuff, and then the modern generation is the non-marketing speak is they're a telco that automates so you don't hate dealing with them. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's ultimately what people are trying to do is telcos, and every business starts thinking about customer success and the lessons from SaaS business. So you're saying just, do that to the edge. Probably be easier, if there's more consistency. So US is difficult because of the regulatory inconsistency. Probably be easier if there's more consistency about access to infrastructure and, stuff like that. But it's interesting. So we'll throw the challenge out. Anyone's interested in doing that, reach out to me. I do know some investors that are happy to invest in deep infrastructure, even if you're not tokenizing it and doing packet coin and whatever. So you have any grand crypto plans for Unitas? You're not going to do packet coin or Colo coin or cloud coin or anything like that? Okay.
Unicorn.
Unicorn, yes, that would be a good one. So how many people is Unitas now?
It's about 130.
Okay. And as you look at the industry, one of the things you said to me, which I've talked with other guests about, is that the people that wind up building this stuff are people that have been at it for, we'll just say, a few decades. How do you think about career progression and getting people into the networking business at Unitas?
Well, I think so. So I've kind of observed over the past, period of time, 10 years, let's call it, that there's not a lot of fresh blood. I hate to use that term. Kind of coming into the industry, focused on the underlying, plumbing of the global network, right? And if you look around in the communities that I think we both have kind of spent most of our lives in, it's mostly the same people. Changed. We've all changed business cards a bunch of times, but it's really kind of the same group of people that have been doing this for a long time, and the need for that plumbing to keep operating and growing and being operated reliably, on a global basis, is only getting more and more important, right? I mean, the digital economy that we were talking about 20 years ago has very much arrived, and the internet is how it works. Everything from going to the coffee shop and using the little Stripe card to pay for your coffee. With no internet, there is no coffee, which would be very unfortunate. So I think that the need for making all of that work is as important as it has ever been, and continuing to get more important. But it requires that there's the next generation of people coming into it. When I got into this space, it was kind of racks of modems with fans blowing on them to keep them cool. And today it's a very different world. We don't just fun story. When I had our first pop in the One Wilshire building, running. There we go.
Running by ISP circa 1994 with the UPS next to the water heater, the modems on the back, the CEO cabling run. So
it looks very familiar. And running cross connects in One Wilshire was there was no service order, there was no portal. It was you grabbed a spool of Cat 6 and a ladder and probably a drill to go pull that cable. So that part has very much changed, but the need for what it enables has not. And so we need more people to kind of get interested in that piece of it. From a career path standpoint, what I like to encourage is people to get into the network operation side. So like other network providers, we have a NOC, where we have teams of people that monitor the health of the network and monitor customer sites, and respond to issues that happen, whether that's a backhoe or something else.
Mhm.
And from there, I think there's a natural progression to the engineering and design and architecture of how networks work and interconnect with each other. But like I said, I think it's important for all of us in the industry to find people that have the intellectual curiosity to understand how does that kind of packet plumbing actually work behind the scenes, and get interested in it. And I will say, be first to say that it's hard to compete with, the kind of newer, sexier, the latest, greatest app that you can go and develop and make a bunch of money at it. It's a lot less glamorous, but it's equally or if not more important.
Do you have a way to quantify? We used to call it the bright shiny eyes versus the dull potato eyes, right? The people that, which is, it's difficult because this is really something you need to reach back into the educational system in college, especially, and sort of tell people this is your destiny to own. Don't just show up and wait for someone to tell you what to do. But do you try to quantify the, ask questions, explore, figure out, as you see whether it's support or system stuff or our internal applications or networking, these are the tracks. Do you sort of quantify that, to people when they're hired, or look for curiosity or things like that when you're hiring people?
It's a tough one to answer. What I would say is that I look for people that have a curiosity, and you can often see that manifest itself in ways that you wouldn't have in a typical interview, right? People that have intellectual curiosity tend to have other interests, or rabbit holes, as you might call them.
Yes, they go deep on. You could find it, and all of a sudden you're down the cooking or car or travel or whatever, and you can learn from them and pick a mini religious fight in a constructive way too. So
yeah, I mean, it's one thing that I kind of took for granted growing up in this kind of community, was that everybody in the community has such varied and interesting and deep interests in things that have nothing to do with the plumbing of the internet, and they're all, they tend to be more than a passing interest, but a kind of almost obsessive nerdiness about understanding everything you possibly can about it. But again, those are totally varied and wide, and can be completely outside the gamut of technology or communications. But the people that typically have some interests like that they're very deep on and passionate about, completely outside of this, tend to be the ones that have the most curiosity about this particular space, and then have a kind of self-fulfilled or self-driven need to fulfill growth in their own career path. Mm-hmm. That's a really hard thing to quantify, though. To your question, how do you quantify that? I don't know.
When you're looking for software developers, you can look at their GitHub, if they're in a position to do that, or you can ask them to walk you through something like that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people that we would love to have come in haven't had might not know that they can fire up a cloud lab, or that there's educational material out there. I know Nanog's trying to address this, but they might not have had they might just not know enough to know what questions to ask. Yes, if you have someone that's purposely gone down the path, you can say, what is your home? What does your lab look like, right? It may not be sitting in your house. It might be fired up on DigitalOcean or Linode or whatever. But yeah, we think about that. How do you reach out, look for the people that are interested there? Maybe even do a little selling Anna at Packet Fabric talks about going for math or physics nerds and talking about the internet as a large distributed system with interesting dynamics and harmonics that you can study and tune. But that'll be more. It could be for graduating seniors maybe, but also more senior people that realize that these things are not all separate, right? That the math of things and the systems that we depend on are that it's interesting to tie those together. I definitely think we could be doing a better job, especially around peering, of teaching and explaining. And peering, we didn't talk about this, but one of the interesting complexities is it's not just about the technology, it's also about the business and politics of that. So yeah, ideas are welcome. So I guess if someone wanted to be seen favorably applying to Unitas and they were younger in career, focus on passion projects in whatever area, would that be a good way to stand out?
Yeah, I think so. I happen to be a physics and space nerd, so I'm always looking for people to geek out and talk about black holes with. But
yes,
but yeah, I mean,
so was it a galaxy or a black hole that was on its side? I read some article and I was like, I don't really understand why this is news, that there's a black hole that's rotated with respect to the plane. Was it the plane of the solar system that created it, or did you follow that? I missed what that was, but I didn't really understand.
I didn't follow that one, but I did just see that they found this kind of bubble that's like a million light years across, that's only in the radio spectrum, and they think it originated at either a black hole or some kind of supernova or something, like uber nova. I don't know, whatever the next term would be. But no, I'm not familiar with the sideways black hole. That sounds interesting though. So maybe an event horizon that is like looking at a piece of paper edge on, right?
Yeah. I understand conceptually. It's like I have a number of those simplifications. The math and physics departments both tried to get me to be a math or a physics major because I was running their computers, and they made me take some specific classes that were helpful for computer science, but it was clear that I was going to be the Salieri, not the Mozart of those. I was going to be, I could understand anything if you give me enough time, but it's not where, my passion was. So, but I do think that, there's a lot of musicians that are in software and internet, stuff in particular. And I think there's got to be some resonances. I'm not a musician, so I don't really, see that in my head, but physics, for sure, the way I was taught physics is very similar to running network, because you're always saying, what should it be doing? How is all this stuff derived from the principles? And there's so many goddamn bugs in networking that whether it's cloud networking or whatever it is, it doesn't work the way it should. So you always are on your feet, you're on your toes. You need to understand what it should be doing, so you can say, is this a bug, or not? And it does take an interesting kind of, personality to enjoy that kind of pedantry.
I think part of it too, not to go at the risk of going on a tangent, but part of it is system level thinking. That it's a very specific set of disciplines that you have to be very proficient and naturally kind of aligned with system level thinking, physics being one of them, certainly. Things like environmental science, where you have thousands of interconnected things, is very much the same. And networking is inherently one of those things. And that's to the point about who do we look for, that's probably the other one, is that people that think in terms of interconnected network of things and how they interact with each other.
So to take the sort of, it's not necessarily a con to that point, but just for context, I was VP of engineering at one data center company, although really was the backbone above net. And I was CTO at Service Central, now Deft. My understanding is, again, very conceptual of physical data center design. Like, I understand, and I could talk about UPSs and flywheels and whatever, but if you actually ask me to put the levers in the right places and really understand what's going on, or if you ask me the physics of why the light bounces around this way. And, it's like in my head, there's a prism. That WDM is a prism. And there's some active stuff, or you could do passive. Like it's possible to do system level thinking about from the micro up to the macro with good approximations that map. And I don't want to scare people like you need to understand all these different things. You can have working approximations, which is what doctors do for the human body and the internet and, stuff like that.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and if there are people interested in getting in, please feel free to ping Grant or myself. Grant, how can people reach you and read about Unitas as well?
Yeah, I would just say our website, unitasglobal.com. My email, phone, it's all right there for anybody that wants to reach out anytime.
Cool. So I'm Avi Freedman. This is Network AF. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, at Avi Freedman. I'm Avi at Kentic.com. And you can find Network AF by Googling it. It has a site and on different podcasts that you can download and like. Grant, thanks for being on, and look forward to continuing to see what you build in the infrastructure space and beyond.
Thanks, Avi. Nice chatting with you. Really appreciate it.